we are all different people and we all have so many parts of us, right? The intersectionality of one person, right? That one thing about me should not cancel me as a whole human being. Because as a Fa'afafine, a Samoan Fa'afafine, who is also a trans woman and a mother, should not be a reason for you to not be willing to reach out to help and support.
Have you felt that in Anchorage? Have you felt discriminated against in other?
Yeah, I have. And I also feel it in leadership.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Tafilisaunoa Toleafoa. She was born and raised in the islands of Samoa in the South Pacific. She moved to Anchorage 20 years ago to join the rest of her family who are already here. Ms. Toleafoa is the executive director of the Pacific Community of Alaska. She serves as co-chair for the board of directors for the National Association of Pacifica Organizations called NAUPO, and she is a member of the board of directors for the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance called INCAPIA. Finally, she serves as an officer for Utopia Alaska. Utopia stands for United Territories of Pacific Islands Alliance, and that organization supports queer and trans Pacific Islanders who are hosting a barbecue in Valley of the Moon Park this Saturday afternoon as part of Anchorage's Pride celebration. Tafilisaunoa's professional background encompasses a diverse range of expertise, including housing interventions for the houseless population, advocacy for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, and working with folks suffering from substance abuse and behavioral and mental health challenges.
Tafilisaunoa Toleafoa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood.
My name is Tafilisaunoa Toleafoa. People call me Tafi, shortened for Tafilisaunoa. I am a Samoan mother of two and a proud Fa'afafine. My pronouns are she, her, and Sunga, which is a Samoan reference to feminine characters and feminine people. I was born in independent state of Samoa in the village of Iwa, Savaii, which is my mom's village. And then I was raised in American Samoa. Both of my parents grew up in both islands as well. And it wasn't hard.
I want to make it super basic for folks who know that there are Samoan people in Anchorage but never think about Samoa. So the independent state of Samoa is a separate island, its own country.
Yes, so the independent state of Samoa is a separate group of islands. And then the American Samoa is also a separate group of islands. They are very near each other. As a matter of fact, you can see American Samoa from independent state of Samoa, and then you can also go to the farthest end of American Samoa, and you can see some part of independent state of Samoa. Right now, no longer called independent state of Samoa. They're just mostly called Samoa. So there's Samoa, and then there's American Samoa. American Samoa is a U.S. territory, and that is where I grew up.
So you grew up as an American?
Yes, because I was taught the American system in American schools. And so I understand and know that like in 1900s, American Samoa became a territory of the United States of America. And independent state of Samoa became independent after being under Australia and New Zealand and British government for some time. And yeah, they're two separate countries, like territory and a country. And right now, American Samoa it's a Monday and independent state of Samoa is a Tuesday. Although they are it's literally like a 30-minute to 45-minute plane ride from one island to the other.
Oh, but it's like the date line goes between them.
Yes, the date line goes between them.
That's so interesting. And do you have family, I assume, in both?
Yes, everyone in Samoa, every Samoan has families in both because we're all Samoan and we all speak the Samoan language and we all have the same culture. And so the only difference is that we were under different rules, and under different colonizing powers. And so the American Samoa is under the United States, and then independent state of Samoa used to be under British, and then they became independent. And then people in American Samoa, however, when they are born in American Samoa, they are not U.S. citizens. They are considered U.S. nationals, which in the state of Alaska, after conversations with Director Beecher, U.S. nationals do not vote in the state of Alaska. And because there is a requirement.
And that's Carol Beecher, who's the current director of Division Elections in Alaska.
Yes, we are currently working on translating information from Director Beecher, clarifying that, because in the past, there's confusion about...
Because Alaska was a territory until 1959, and from interviewing people from that time period, that's one of their biggest complaints, was that they were not able to vote. They could not vote in presidential elections. They didn't have a senator. They didn't have a representative. I think Alaskans should be especially sensitive to that issue.
I think so too. And that's why we wanted to clarify it with Director Beecher. There is a confusion because when people move from American Samoa to the United States, there are some states that they are eligible to vote. But in Alaska, our state, you're not supposed to vote unless you are a U.S. citizen. And because they are U.S. nationals, in the past, how you register to get license, and it's attached to how you get your documentation and identification. If are you a U.S. citizen? Yes or no? In the past, people were instructed to say yes if you were a U.S. national.
To say that you were a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, the U.S. national question.
Wasn't there.
Correct.
Gotcha. And so that caused confusion.
And that caused confusion because then when people say, do you want to register to vote? And people would just say yes. And then on the American Samoa birth certificates, it does say American Samoa. So what happened is as soon as you see a birth certificate that says American, you're like, okay, you're American. You're fine. Perfect. You're fine.
Is there a pathway for a U.S. national to become a U.S. citizen?
It's the same pathway that naturalized citizens go through. Naturalization as someone who's
if you were
from
Italy
or from independent state of Samoa.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you actually have to go through that same process. You have to actually go and get the interview, the whole 9 yards. Although,
was there any preference given towards U.S. nationals, or
no? There is no preference given to U.S. nationals. They have to go through the same exact process. And I am aware that the Office of Senator Murkowski is currently working on some legislation to give some leeway for nationals to have access. A lot of the reasons that we are hearing from our community around why people are not going through the naturalization process, it's dragged out, especially for U.S. nationals, that it's dragged out and it's also expensive.
You can't vote for a mayor. You can't vote for assembly member.
No, as a national, you are, it's clear in the letter that was provided that no, you are.
That is crazy.
Yeah. So if you're a U.S. national, you cannot vote in the state of Alaska. So we're going to work on making sure that our community is aware of that. And if they have voted, it is important that the state acknowledges its part in that confusion.
How many Samoans do we have in Alaska?
Based on census, like 13 to 15,000 overall.
But you think there's probably a lot more that just aren't accounted for.
It's undercounted. And so I would say that we're like maybe over 20,000 people that are
mainly in Anchorage?
Yeah, mainly in Anchorage. Like 70% of us is in Anchorage. But you go to Barrow or Ukiavik, right? And
you'll see Samoans there.
Yeah, and Kodiak. And there's so many Pacific Islanders in all these communities. And Juneau has a very big Samoan community as well. And our work at Pacific Community of Alaska encompasses those areas because there's chunks of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders in those areas.
So getting back to your childhood, so you grew up in American Samoa.
Yes, so I grew up in American Samoa.
Even though you were born
in independent state of Samoa,
What are the politics between American Samoa and the independent state of Samoa? Do folks try to go from one to the other? Do people judge people because they choose to live in one over the other? Is there a benefit to being one over the other?
definitely more benefits of being the U.S. national versus independent state of Samoa. It's a small country. And so, of course, being U.S. national, you have access to a lot of services and a lot of funds. And to the U.S., when you want to come and have access to all the services here in the States, you can do that. Independent state of Samoa, however, you have to go through the process of visa and all of the immigration processes. And those processes and those privileges also creates a dynamic around othering, right? It creates a dynamic of we're better because we're under the United States and the American dollar is stronger than the independent Samoan dollar. And so
down on.
Yes. We're more developed or whatever that looks like. And so, yeah, there's definitely that dynamic as well.
The question is, then, why do people choose to stay in the independent state of Samoa?
That's because most people don't have a choice, right? That's where they were born, and
you were born there.
Yeah.
How did you get it?
My parents are citizens, so it was like, yeah, my dad was naturalized, and so my grandma was born in American Samoa, and so my dad was not born in Samoa, but had access to American Samoa because of his mom, and then that's how we were living in American Samoa.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then, so growing up in American Samoa, like it was normal, right? And school was the reason. Actually going outside of my home and like at church was where the dichotomy happened for me. At home, it never occurred to me that I was different. Like I would say that like it was church and at school that really made me feel like I was different.
Boys in this line,
Yes.
girls in this line.
Yeah. It was those kinds of things. Oh, you have to go there. It was always very challenging for me to be, okay, it's nap time. You have to go with the boys. And I'm like, oh, like, I'm not comfortable there. Right. And as a young person, like, you're like, okay, yeah, we just have to listen. And so.
Did you have siblings?
Yeah. I have 9 siblings.
Oh.
I have a very big family.
What number are you? Middle. Okay. So then you had older and younger brothers and sisters, and you felt the same as them at home?
Yeah, I was
You were
fine.
just you.
Yeah, I was just me. And
so the gender issue wasn't really
no
an issue.
And then mom also was very supportive from the beginning, as in I was also like brought up to support and be there with my mom.
Yeah.
My younger sisters, all my biological sisters are younger than me. And mom was like, you were very feminine in your ways. And so she just like, okay, you don't want to go. Whenever my dad would go to the farm with the boys, I'm like, no, Mom, you don't want to go. And so then she's, okay, then you help me do this and you help me do that. And so that's how I was raised. I was raised by my mom, like doing house chores and cooking and cleaning, mostly cleaning. And that was the norm. And my brothers never questioned it.
Mm.
There were
no
times,
teasing.
Yeah.
No teasing about you staying with mommy.
Yeah.
Or...
No, my brothers are just like, my brothers are very protective and they also protect me like as their sister. And so like growing up also, like I was very scrawny and very flamboyant.
Yeah.
And so there were times where people saw me as different, and I shared the same stories with a lot of trans and gay people that grew up showing different characteristics, and people would say things. Little kids would say things in school, but my brothers are very protective of me, and even my cousins that I was close to back home were also very protective. So,
can you talk a little bit about what Samoan culture in general teaches or thinks about trans people?
The Samoan culture has a gender, like there's a gender called the fa'afafine, right? And the fa'afafine is, the word fa means in the essence of, and fa'afine is women. So in the essence of a woman, or to be like women. Margaret Mead, an anthropologist that was in the islands, spoke about that in her book, The Coming of Age in Samoa. And there was a character in her book that actually was among the women and would weave with the women and talk with them and was always like going between the two, could do both men and women responsibilities. And so that is a gender norm in the Samoan culture, and it was normalized. And the opposite of that is the fa'atane or fa'atama. It's a new, it doesn't mean that we didn't have fa'atamas in the past.
And it's like for trans men.
Yeah. And it's to be like men, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, so speaking as a fa'afafine, the gender of fa'afafine is also a spectrum. There are fa'afafines who lean towards trans, like they are trans folks,
Right.
and they are going to go through the transition, and they are transitioning, right? However far they would want to push their transness, they would do that. However, there's also fa'afafine that would not want to transition, and they will just be fa'afafine and be okay with the body and everything that comes with it. And the responsibilities and yeah, there are fa'afafines in my culture and my close sisters that you will not be able to clock their teeth, whatever.
Right.
That means they would just walk in the room and present as women, and you're never going to know that they were trans. And then there are fa'afafines in the Samoan community that it's obvious that they are fa'afafine, and we're okay with that. As a matter of fact, growing up, my teachers in high school and people that I looked up to were fa'afafines in the community. I do have my uncle, my dad's side, youngest sibling of my dad, is fa'afafine, and Uncle John is amazing.
But you call him Uncle John.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And Uncle John and his husband are like loving fathers to children that they have, and they live in the islands there now, and John is not transitioning.
Got it.
Yeah. But they are still, Papa John is fa'afafine, and your fa'afafine list is not measured on rather you go through the transition or you don't go through the physical transition.
So there were fa'afafine working at the school.
There were teachers.
So to me, that seems like school would probably be a little bit more sensitive to children like you.
Yeah. So I think it's because school is a Western construct in the sense of like how like men should have bathrooms. Like then everything was like genderized, and no, bathrooms are bathrooms. Everyone goes, close the door, go back, and that was the thing. Like those were the places that I felt very uncomfortable in, because it was like I had to go to where I was like told to go, and I'm like, but that's not me.
Did you self-identify as fa'afafine, or did other people identify you as that?
It is an identity that is within the culture, right? And that is my culture, the Samoan culture, and I do identify as fa'afafine.
Did you as a child?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like early on.
Yeah. There was when I understood that I was different, and I saw that there is a difference because there were other people like me in the community, including my Uncle John. I was like, okay, yeah, that is who I am. But I also knew that, no, I wasn't just a fa'afafine in the sense that I was going to stop at a certain place, right? That I knew that my transness will need to go far beyond. And as a matter of fact, that is what I'm working on now. I've had some surgeries, and I've never felt complete in my body since I started like the physical transition. And yeah.
And you knew that early on.
Yeah, I was a woman. I'm a woman, right? I knew that I was meant to have this, and I am a woman. And so I think that's where some people might have a problem with, is that like, for me, I don't have to transition my brain. I grew up as a woman. I am a woman. I identified as a woman since I came out of my mom. My physical body did not say that. And that's the hardest part around like the idea of trans woman, right? Because like mentally, for me, I've always been a woman. My body did not match. And as a matter of fact, so I can tell the story of how, as a young person growing up, one of my classes when I was in 6th grade, social studies, you had to write current articles. where you read a newspaper or you read a magazine article and then you summarize it and you turn it in. So it's that kind of assignment. And I didn't do my homework, and so I was rushing through. And just so happened, this was sixth grade at Hawaii Elementary. I picked up a magazine. We walked out reading this magazine and looking for an article to quickly cut out. And in this magazine, it talked about how a doctor successfully completed the surgery for a trans woman. And I remember telling myself that day, it was a sunny, beautiful day at Hawaii Elementary, around the rails of going from like 7th grade to 6th grade. And I promised myself that I was going to do that. That was going to be what I needed in my life to completely finish everything. Mm-hmm. And I also promised myself that was going to happen before I turned 25. And I turned 40 this year. But for me, it's something that I had to do. And it's always been something that I feel will make me complete and the person that I am. And I am a woman. And so my body has to be a woman.
Did you turn that assignment in on that article?
Yes, I did.
Oh, good for you.
I sure did. I turned the assignment in. My teacher was like, you go do it. Like, my teachers were awesome and my training growing up.
So what about the Samoan Seventh-day Adventist Church? Was it as accepting?
It was. So in the islands, the church was tolerable. They tolerated folks because of that concept.
And it was the culture.
Yeah, it's the culture. It's a part of culture. And so there was a challenge when I came up here.
How old were you when you came to Anchorage?
20. Yeah. So I turned 20 up here. But yeah,
So you came up 20 years ago.
Yeah. 20 years ago. So it was just people not understanding and not knowing. And so, like, the Samoan Seventh-day Adventist, I love the church, the local church, because people understand me.
Mm-hmm.
I love my local church. There are some things that needs to happen within the larger the greater Adventist church movement, but yeah.
I assume with the name Samoan Seventh-day Adventist Church that it's Samoan community.
Yes, it's a very big Samoan community, and it's a place that I can go and be and still worship and believe that there is a God. There is definitely a higher being, and be in community with people that care and love me. My family's there, close friends.
And did you all come live the whole family when you were 20?
No, my whole family came before me. I was actually the last member of our family to come.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what brought them here?
It's in search of better future for our family, and our parents made the decision that it would be good to move out of American Samoa and move to the U.S. We had family here, and so first my brother came up and he went into the military and he worked hard to move everyone up here and secured places and got people together, and then I joined them after college back home.
So you can't vote, but you could work here legally. Like,
yes.
That's not an issue.
Yes.
That's the one benefit.
Yeah, so that as nationals, though, they cannot vote, but they can work and have access to all.
And serve in the military. You can serve in the military and not vote for mayor. That's crazy.
When you get into the military, then they can help you with
your citizenship
and things, so that you can actually vote.
Right.
Yeah. So my brother and most of my family can vote because all of my nieces and nephews are born here, so they have access and they can vote. So,
what did you do when you got here?
So when I came here, I went to school, which is where my name got shortened at the University of Alaska.
So you started going by Tafi?
Yeah, because roll calls and it was like, what do I call you? And then I was like, oh, okay, you can call me Tafi. I just use the first 4 letters of my name. And then that's where Tafi just finished school in 2007 and then worked at the American Civil Liberties Union of Alaska for some time. And then because the goal was to go to law school. Also, ultimate goal was to become a judge, of course. So I knew that I had to go to law school, get my law degree, and then after that, go to practice, and then after practicing, then hopefully governor would make me a judge. That all stopped after the experience of the slow movement of justice and understanding that through the lens of the state of Alaska. And that stopped, and decided that I was going to go into social work and going to people work and supporting people that were there at and community work, and went into and worked with folks that are experiencing domestic violence and sexual assault through Awake. Also was working as a counselor and a manager for a Kila house, Kila here in Anchorage, and also at Salvation Army Cliff Road Center. So I was working with a lot of marginalized communities and people that were struggling with substance abuse issues, mental health issues. And then after that, went on and worked for the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, which then opened my eyes around like all the many issues that are within our city. And then I worked for Covenant Health Alaska, creating the housing program there, and then ended my service with Covenant Health as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. When COVID happened is when I transitioned to become the Executive Director of
Pacific Community of Alaska.
Pacific Community of Alaska.
What does Pacific Community of Alaska do?
Pacific Community of Alaska is a nonprofit organization. Our goal is to bring together and to provide services that are much needed for the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities in Alaska. We exist because of COVID. Some of us were privileged to be in spaces as I was representing Covenant House and at the Anchorage group that was brought together by the health department, and then the state of Alaska came into the same group around equity and distribution of vaccination. And it was through that group that we were able to push system to like, let's see data in a way that would help all communities that were represented. And the data that showed really highlighted the need for support and information to get out to the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community as we were highly impacted by COVID. And so that's when a group of us came together and decided we're going to have some discussions and see if we can support our community that way, and which then led to conversation around let's create an organization that could work on all of these issues, the health issues, the mental health issues, the civic engagement issue, immigration issue, like what are all the other issues, right? But the focus was on primary care and health care, because the biggest reason why Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders were impacted by COVID so much is because of the underlying conditions that were not addressed during COVID. And a lot of our communities were walking around not knowing that they had underlying conditions. And so when they showed up at the hospitals, because they didn't have they didn't have any of those records, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, all of the things, and they would come to the hospital during COVID. So the symptoms for COVID was taken care of, but not the underlying conditions, because it was never diagnosed, because they didn't have primary care services. And so that's how we came into the work and translated materials for COVID, hosted clinics, and went into churches and gave information, translated information in our languages, and explained the vaccine, right? And it wasn't to push people to get the vaccine, but it was to inform, have them have all the information if they need to make decisions for themselves. And that's how we operate. It's important to have people have decisions over their own health. And that's how we started. And then our young people decided, we want to get into mental health. Let's have young people are feeling isolated. Let's do something. And so they started a program called Nation Lounge, which then started off as an Anchorage-based program, which was a Zoom. And then the word got out. And then people from Samoa, Tonga.
All joined.
All joined in during a Zoom call in the evening, and then people just started talking to each other. And then we had some of our brothers and sisters that were serving in the military outside of the U.S. and
participating.
People, from Germany, and it became a thing where every week our young people that were like that are part of our board just had conversations with everyone, and it was this is a formal way of no, let's just check in on each other and care for each other. And our work is around health and wellness. We currently have work with the Anchorage Neighborhood Health Center, and then we have work around mental health. Our work around mental health is mostly with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault.
I want to bounce way back. So, about your name. Tafilisaunoa.
Tafilisaunoa. So Tafilisaunoa is it has a meaning. Tafilisaunoa means you are someone who can manage and someone who can be in spaces and be a leader, right? And
so you are the embodiment of your name.
It's somewhat, right? And so like it has a negative connotation that they don't like, which is like the word Tafilisaunoa can also be like used in a negative way where you're wasteful. Like you can just do whatever you want to do, but like you can also Tafilisaunoa in a good way where you're accountable, right? To the people that you serve. And that's the kind of leader that I want to be. I want to be held accountable. I want to be someone who is doing what the people want us to focus on and things that should help my community become better in Alaska.
I want to ask this question respectfully. I don't want you to talk about anything you want to talk about.
Ask the question.
Okay, tell us about your children. Like, how did you have children?
So my children. Okay, that's a beautiful question though. So my son is Rupeti Totua Toleafoa, and then my daughter is Maddie Toleafoa. My son, when I explain it, my son is a product of my brother-in-law and my sister. They decided that this is going to be my child because I asked for it. And my son is actually a conversation between me and my daughter. My daughter's older than my son. My daughter's now 15, turning 16 at the end of this year. And my daughter is a product of my brother and his wife. And so I was still with the ACLU. I was a young person, being young and doing young things. And so at that time, I felt like I needed something that would make me feel that I'm accountable to and holding myself accountable to someone I can love and I can provide for. And then and that next thing in my head was like, I'm supposed to be a mom, so why not get your baby? The time my brother's still serving in the military, and and they talked to him about it, and then they talked to her mom about it, and then I'm ready, and they have other children. I would love to be responsible to take over their pregnancy at that time, and so and they agreed, and so she was born. I was in the hospital when my daughter was born in Amador.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is that like your family thing, or is that like a Samoan cultural thing?
I see that often in other Samoan families, but like for my family, it was definitely something that we had to talk about, and it was and so they are my children.
So you took her home and you raised her.
Yeah. It was like the moms just, including my sister, they just give birth to them and hand them over. They are now mine. And however, my children are well aware of their
origins.
And they have relationships with their biological parents because they also felt I didn't want to take them away from knowing who they are and that I love my family. I want to keep my family together. And so they know their biological siblings, and then they also know that they are siblings. My son was a conversation between me and my daughter, and
she wanted the brother.
So we talked about it, and And she's, I'm already the princess of this family, and yeah, I'm ready to get my brother. And she's like, okay, let's get your brother. And so I had a conversation with my sister who was pregnant at the time, and my brother-in-law, and so they agreed, and
I-
found my child.
For me, imagining like having this conversation with one of my siblings, I just can't imagine them doing it. I love my siblings and I think they love me, but they wouldn't if my sister-in-law was pregnant. I'm just imagining my younger brother. I can't even imagine his face. He'd be like, what? It would just be like such a foreign concept. You wouldn't think about that.
Yeah, so I have like a very close relationship with my siblings. I mean, as I said, like my brother, especially the one in the military, very close to him. And so when I had the conversation with him, my brothers and all my siblings know that I don't drop responsibilities.
Right. This was something you were going to like decide to do for a few weeks.
And it also was like, I needed it for myself. And I would say that I give credit to my daughter for assisting me in becoming the woman that I am today, because she's a very strong little girl. And I see so much of myself and how she carries herself and how she pushes back when she needs to and how she puts herself together in times of hard time. Then so my daughter is definitely a blessing to me, and my son is also an amazing blessing to me. So
How old is your son now?
He's 7.
7. And she's 16.
And she's turning 16 this year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so there's a little bit of age gap.
Yes, definitely. Definitely age gap there. But
you mentioned working with the Hawaiian community. Would you say that is the closest sister community with the Samoan community here in Alaska? Or is it all equal? Or, I mean, I guess can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of the Pacific Islander community in Alaska and the way you guys interact?
It is the way we were colonized that really differentiates and who was colonized at a certain time. And the Pacific Islands as a whole is divided into 3 sections, where there's the Polynesian community, and then there's the Micronesian community, and then there's the Melanesian community. So, and these are...
And you don't have to tell me, like, who is in which community. I don't know this history. I'm so sorry.
Oh my gosh. So the Polynesian community, you would say, so on the map, you would see that there's a triangle, and it would be the Hawaiian Islands, and then it would go down to the Samoan Islands and the Tongan. So that's the prominent, in that subgroup are the Hawaiians, Samoans, and the Tongans. And the Polynesian meaning poly, there's so many. There's a lot of them. There's not one characteristic that would like actually identify.
There's not a dominant group.
There's no dominant group. And then they all have similar characteristics to each other. And you can see that. And then in the Micronesian community, however, they are from a smaller, you would have the Chuukese and the Marshallese and Chamorro in this community. And these communities and these islands, I would say that they are the islands that was most impacted by the testing of the atomic bomb, right? And so health issues with this community is also very high. And we do have a very, very big community of Micronesians here in Alaska too.
I didn't know.
And here in Anchorage, they actually have a celebration in July every year. And micro meaning small. And so it was because of the smaller islands, they call it the small, like micro. But at the same time, this is also the group with like shorter stature people. And so it came from that, Micronesian, smaller people, smaller islands. And then the Melanesians, you will have the Papuan New Guinea, we have Fijians, and these are folks that are darker in skin, but they're all Pacific Islanders. Mm-hmm. So
do we have Melanesians here?
Yeah, we have a Fijian community here. And I'm also aware that there are some Papuans that are in the state of Alaska. Mm-hmm. And so I think all the communities, all the groups are here in the Anchorage area and then across the state. But the bigger groups are, of course, the Tongans and the Samoans and Hawaiians, because they are the bigger groups here.
Is there any hierarchy that Hawaii is a state, and so those people can vote? And
that is something that we're currently working on amongst ourselves and at the same time in systems. For there is definitely the resource, right? Understanding that resource is the biggest focus of a lot of things, cannot get anything done without resources. And the Native Hawaiian community, I think right now, has more Hawaiians living outside of Hawaii than Hawaii. And that's where the leadership on the island and out in diaspora are also working towards making sure that there is connection between the islands and the folks that have been priced out of paradise, right? Including folks that live here in Anchorage and Alaska. So we have connections with the health systems in the islands of Hawaii through Papa'olakahi, which is their health system, to connect with folks here in Alaska, because we are also lumped with the Asian community in a lot of things. Just this past month, we had AAPI month. And so it's also very intentional that we have decided that we want to include an H, that an H has to be in there. And that's where the challenge is.
Because you feel like the Hawaiians have been excluded historically from the Asian Pacific Islander community.
Yes.
They're considered Americans or
Correct. And it's because they're a state, right? And so then it's hard because a lot of Asian and Pacific Islanders are not citizens. They're like immigrant communities. And so then because they're Hawaiian, they're like pushed out when it comes to AAPI. And so it's similar to how Alaska Natives and American Indians, it's intentional. We have to make sure that like these groups, although we know that within these groups, there's also subgroups.
right.
So it's a similar thing for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. And then you add Asian, it's even more diverse.
Like this is probably a dumb question, but like the Indian Health Service, the Alaska Native Medical Center, I think I was told that Hawaiians could go. Is that not true? And are Samoans able to?
So that is the conversation that we are working on now, is to ensure that could happen. I hope that they know that the intention for Pacific Community of Alaska is to be in conversation and to have like honest conversation about how we can support Indigenous communities.
Because you're an Indigenous community that was colonized. That's the same thing.
It's same, but different in the sense that Alaska Natives, this is their homeland. So
you're living on their homeland.
We live in their homeland, and we're thankful that as visitors and as people of other Indigenous communities have been given this opportunity to be here. Mm-hmm. And so what I want to have the conversation around is how can we work towards having, a way, especially for Native Hawaiians, and that's the community that I would focus on first, is that specifically for the Native Hawaiian community to have access to the services provided there, as similar to American Indians, as this is not American Indians' homeland, right? Most of this is Alaska Native homeland. So how can we create something similar, as Hawaii is also a state now? And so that would be the first conversation. And no, other than that, I know that there's so much connection between our communities. We have Alaska Native Hawaiians, right? And there's so many Samoans, Native Hawaiian. I want to bring up Alyssa Peavy. She's Samoan and Alaska Native, right? And so these folks are able to access service because they are both Samoan and Alaska Native. And just having that conversation with them about the future of Alaska.
So you serve on a few different national organizations, the National Association of Pacific Organizations, NAOP, NOPO. And you're also on the board of directors of the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance, NQAPIA.
And CAPIA.
And so I'm curious if you can compare and contrast those two organizations in terms of, I know you're also an officer for Utopia, United Territory, Pacific Islands Alliance, and you're also part of Queer and Trans-Pacific Islanders, QTPI. And I'm curious more about the National Association of Pacific Organizations. It sounds like Samoan culture has a place for you as a trans woman in a way that maybe other cultures might not have. Do you feel more conspicuous in those environments, or can you talk a little bit about that?
In Samoan culture, yes, I feel belonging in my own community as a Fa'afafine trans woman. However, going outside of my community, it's different, right? There are Native Hawaiian cultures and identities that are similar to the Samoan Fa'afafine, but in those cultures as well, it's different. For example, I would say the Native Hawaiian culture has gender identity that is mahu, and it's similar to the Samoan Fa'afafine Fatane, but it is still mahu for the Hawaiian culture. And in other Pacific Islands, the gender identities are not acknowledged any longer or is lost due to beliefs and religious beliefs, and Christianity plays a very big role in that. There is a loss of cultural identities and gender identities within the culture because of cultures deciding to just be like, this is the economy, right?
Right.
It's either or. It's one or the other. And I think that is one thing that I am thankful that my culture held on to. And I feel like it might have something to do with the different powers that colonized the islands of Samoa, and which we see now that there are two different, there's American Samoa and independent state of Samoa, and I feel like that might have something to do with it. The National Association of Pacific Organizations is a national group that with organizations in state, right? There are states affiliates of Naopo, and right now we have affiliates in Alaska, we have Austin, we have affiliates in Washington, and then Pacific Northwest. So a lot of the states Pacific Northwest, and then there's some in Arkansas and Ohio.
What states have the most Samoan people?
I would say Hawaii and
Alaska.
Yeah, Alaska and California. So those three. And Pacific Community of Alaska and Naopo is hosting a conference up here in Anchorage, bringing business to Anchorage by the end of September going to October.
Awesome.
It's the Pacific Health Gathering because the focus is on health. And there's going to be folks from all these organizations and community health workers that are doing community health work in their organization in the states that are going to come up. And some are researchers and some are doctors, and they're going to talk about best practices around culturally relevant care for our people and what are the issues that we want to elevate, and how can we create best practices that fits our cultures, right? And then also there's a much need for conversations of how are we creating an equitable way of distributing care and services, and how are we and resources amongst the groups where there's the Micronesian community, there's the Melanesian communities, there's the Polynesian community. How can we be good siblings and neighbors to each other?
And then I want to run to Kapia,
the Harvard National Queer
Asian
Islander Alliance, and Kapia.
In Kapia, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, this is probably another assumption that I'm making, but whenever I hear Asian Pacific Islander Alliance or something where they include Asia and the Pacific Islands, I just think maybe I'll just be overrun, because I feel like the Asian countries would take over and be the predominant power in those organizations.
So me being a member of the board is an acknowledgement of that. And Kapia has taken on that. They have acknowledged that there has been the lack of involvement of Pacific Islands or lack of access for the Pacific Islands to this work that they have been doing. And so and Kapia is going through some transition, and the leadership of Kapia decided that this is the time we need to bring in our name says the National Queer Asian Islander Alliance, and there is no board member that is Pacific Islander. And so they reached out and said, "Okay, would you like to be a member?" And I said, "It's about time." Because it's about time. And they acknowledged that there has been a lack of representation of Pacific Islander in that.
Is it predominantly coming from Korea, Japan?
No, and that's the thing. Right now, the board is very diverse in the sense that there's South Asians and
both from India,
from India, and on the board.
To me, where it starts to become unwieldy in terms of the number of people that it's representing. If you go all the way to India and Pakistan, then it's half the world. I mean, I know that's an exaggeration, but not that much of an exaggeration. It's a lot of people.
It's not half of the world. I think it's global majority. That is global majority right there. And yeah, definitely. And that's the truth. But then we work in systems that want to label and have all these things. Now it's like we have to work within the system, but also it keeps people out and representation. Like, how do we come up with a formula that is equitable when it comes to representation? And I don't know. I'm sure if I do some focused work, I could probably solve it, but I don't know that now.
When I lived in Saudi Arabia for a while, and I was teaching there, and I was talking to my students, and I said something about where all the places that I lived. I was like, I've never lived in Asia. And they're like, "Sir, you're living in Asia right now." And I was like, Saudi Arabia doesn't feel like Asia. It's not what I think of, but I think of Asia. But the Middle East counts as Asia.
Yeah. Like literally the Middle East is Asia.
And then we count Egypt as part of the Middle East, and it's Africa. So
I think it's important for people to know that people created these structures, right? And they're human beings that created these structures that we currently are holding on to. And yes, there was a place for them at that time, right? There was place and time for those structures to be in place. But I'm sure that the forefathers or the people that created these structures did not want us to just hold on to it without changing it with our narrative and our way of life right now.
Because I go out on the limb and say that you and I from very different cultures have about the same in common with the average Saudi Arabian. That's not our cultures. But you've been grew the Asian Pacific Islander group.
Correct.
Yeah, correct.
And it's interesting. It's a conversation that we tend to have often in our office. OMG, just imagine if we said that we are going to do AA and HPI work and how much more that we will be doing.
Right.
And then on top of that, how do we then say we're doing AAPI work without any AA representation?
Right.
It's on top of way above me. And so that is the acknowledgement that Encapula had. And so they requested and
when you're there,
made the connection. So that
we're over time. Are there any things that I didn't cover?
I think for me it would be important to voice that it's important to love, right? It's important to love people and that people are not easy, right? And it's not just one thing, right? I want to acknowledge that we are all different people and that we all have so many parts of us, right? The intersectionality of one person, right? That one character or one thing about me should not cancel me as a whole human being. Because as a Fa'afafine, a Samoan Fa'afafine, who is also a trans woman, Mia and a mother, should not be a reason for you to not be willing to reach out to help and support.
Have you felt that in Anchorage? Have you felt discriminated against an other?
Yeah, I have. And I also feel it in leadership, that people hear folks that are more in spaces. I'm also someone who is quiet when I have to, but I also will be one who will speak when we know when needed to. And there are times where I would say things and not take it seriously because I know it's because of my identity. But I will say it still because that's who I am.
Meaning that for example, in an Asia Pacific or Islander organization, for example, you might be discounted because you're the trans woman speaking or whatever.
Yeah.
And then vice versa, I wonder in queer organizations if you feel dismissed in some way because you're the Samoan person speaking or not feeling as included.
I think it depends on who you're talking to, right? Or the space that you are in. As I find myself often now in most spaces, I'm usually the only representative or one of the 2 or 3 representatives of the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community. And so then in those spaces, it's like, what's your intention behind bringing me in here, right? Is your intention to actually support and to help, or is your intention to check mark, right? And so, and those are the questions that I ask because they don't just show up as the executive director of Pacific Community of Alaska. I also show up as a mom. I'm also showing up as a Samoan Fa'afafine. I'm also showing up as a believer that there is higher power. And so all of the things, just because I say something or just because someone has their one part of them is different or one part of them does not agree with who you are, does not immediately make them wrong.
It's Pride Month, June.
Yes.
Yeah. And Pride Week in Anchorage with the parade coming up on Saturday. Do you feel that's something you celebrate?
Oh, of course. I think Pride includes everyone and it should be for everyone. Because no matter whether you're straight, it's still a gender. And Pride includes all genders and everyone. And yeah, Utopia, Alaska is hosting, it is a group of queer and trans Pacific Islanders, and we're hosting a community barbecue on the 29th. Saturday. So they're hosting that barbecue at the Valley of the Moon Park after the parade.
Okay.
So, yeah.
There's and also Korean Alaska Friendship Day is happening that day as well. Yeah.
Correct. It's happening that day too, and the block party is happening that day.
Everything.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So, and Utopia is also a nonprofit in Alaska. It is a very close and dear organization to Pacific Community of Alaska. So,
Tafilisaunoa, Toleafoa. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
we talked about so many.
We did. We talked about a lot of things.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great having the conversation.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com.